I've been doing research.
Okay, a bit of a drum roll here because the winning work, or the winning award goes to Nicholas Blowers for the work Collapse Red Rate.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Paddington Art Prize for 2009 and to the floor talk. Many apologies from Lynn Easterway, who regrettably couldn't be here today, but in her place, Jo Frost, artist, exhibiting at Waters Gallery, art lecturer at COFA and the National Art School, and art writer for the Artist's Profile magazine, very kindly and I think bravely stepped in at the last minute. Thank you very much for doing that, Jo. So Jo will talk about this exhibition for you. So thank you, Jo.
Thanks, Marlene. Thanks. Thank you very much, and thanks for coming. I will indeed talk about the exhibition and particular works in the exhibition, but I wanted to talk first of all generally about the artist, the individual artist and tradition. And of course landscape painting is one tradition amongst many art traditions. But before going into landscape as an area of, that I'm going to talk about, I just wanted to talk about what is tradition and how does the artist in this period actually relate to that. Eventually I'll be just speaking freely and ad lib, but I wanted to read, I wrote some notes down, so I'll just read through this. Okay. Artists today are free to practice art in whatever way they want. This has been increasingly the case in Western art for roughly 200 years, since church and state patronage of art began to dry up. While it's true that all through this period there have been official academies of art and prevailing fashions that most artists have followed, it's been the individual artist's prerogative to buck the trend and pursue their own vision. As long as the artist is happy to accept that they might have to live in poverty and work in obscurity, they can exercise a degree of creative freedom. There are many famous examples of artists who've worked for a long time on the fringes of the culture, suddenly being thrust to the centre and celebrated, sometimes posthumously, as in the famous case of Van Gogh, or while they're at the height of their creativity, for example, Jackson Pollock. And because it has so often happened that work we end up valuing very highly has come from these kinds of artists, we look upon the artist's creative freedom as one of the strengths of our culture. And I suppose that that situation of creative freedom is probably preferable to that of an artist living in, say, the Soviet Union, the old Soviet Union, or a dictatorship where style and content are imposed or determined from above. But what does it feel like to actually live with this creative freedom? Think about it from the artist's point of view. How would you like to wake up on a Monday morning and head off to the studio, aware of all of the great minds and strong spirits that have preceded you in the history of art, and intending to make a contribution of your own, but not even knowing quite what it is you're aiming for? You know that you have certain skills with your medium, but these could just as easily be traps that limit you to a superficial outcome. You're aware that some of your best work has come from a fairly intuitive or even spontaneous approach, but how can you rely upon that as your method? An artist can reach a point where it seems impossible to even start a painting, let alone finish it. And many older artists I know tell me that this only becomes harder as you get older, that experience blocks certain possibilities off rather than opening them up. Clearly, creative freedom is not quite the liberation it might have appeared to be. It places the artist in a state of perpetual searching, a continual search for the conditions that will enable them to realise their work. Which brings me to the subject of tradition. One of the ways that artists find themselves and build a foundation for their work is through the examples of others. It's one thing to notice the beauty of a sunset, another to try to paint it, and quite another thing again to paint it with the awareness that thousands, well, hundreds, let's say, of other painters have tried that before you. This awareness is what tradition is. It affects the way you see your medium, your subject, and yourself. One of the most unnerving experiences of following your own creative path is to discover the work of an artist who's been dead for decades or centuries, whose work seems to be realer to you than anything you've actually done yourself. And when this happens, it causes you to think again about the way you paint and what your whole orientation is. So every artist's work, I think, owes something to a predecessor or a number of predecessors. And in that sense, all art, even that which appears to be avant-garde, is traditional. Now, landscape painting is a very rich source of tradition, and in Australian art, it's probably been the major genre by which white Australian artists have differentiated themselves from European culture. Landscape painting includes many sub-traditions. For example, pastoral landscape, urban landscape, desert landscape. You've got tonal painting and colour painting, realism and abstraction, landscapes imagined in the studio, and plein air or outdoor landscape painting. And of course, in Australia, there are also the many Aboriginal representations of land, which are different from the European concept of landscape, and now acknowledged as such an important part of Australian art. Now, of all of these genres that I've just mentioned, there are many examples in this exhibition. So what I'm going to do now is discuss, I think, 8 particular paintings, from the point of view of the traditions they're a part of, and what the individual artist has managed to bring to those traditions in each case. I can't do justice to the full range of what's on show here because it is too varied. And I suppose I have to confess that I'll be gravitating towards those that I have an affinity for myself, but hopefully it will still represent a reasonably broad range of styles and approaches. Now, we will actually have to move for me to begin this process, so if we could just shift to the other room and we'll have a look at a few works in there, that'd be great.